Hello everybody. In this video I wanted to share with you the lisle magnetic socket trays. Now there's 4 socket trays for the 3/8 drive sockets, both deep and shallow. And then there's 2 socket trays for the 1/4 inch drive. Those are also both deep and shallow. We'll go over some of the pros and cons of these. They work well. They're not the most efficient in size in your box. But unfortunately my box is an older box, so I can't stand my sockets vertically. I wish that I could, but I can't. So with that being said, this is the option I chose to go with. It might change down the road, but this is what works now. And it works pretty good. Okay, basically as you see here, it's pretty self-explanatory. But they have a magnet that's on the underside, right here. And some of them will fall off. That's one of the cons. I'll get to that in a little bit. But this magnetic strip here is what holds them on. Now, I know that a couple just fell, and that happens. But if you're not really flipping them upside down, it's not a big deal. Think about if it didn't have a magnet on this, and then it had like sides on each side, and it was just like a gravity fit in there. If you carried them normal, really, as long as you were careful, you wouldn't have an issue with that. The magnet is just a little bit of a bonus, and it makes getting the sockets out pretty simple. Okay, and if you're careful, you can see, you go over, I mean, considering one just fell out, most of them were retained. So as long as you're careful and you hold it upright or even on a slight angle or something like that, you shouldn't have too much of an issue. Now obviously, if you're going to put it on an angle, I would recommend putting the deep sockets in the up position, because that way, because they're the heavier socket, obviously, the same size magnet holds a heavier socket or a lighter socket. It's gonna retain those lighter sockets easier than the heavier sockets, obviously, right? Now let me throw these in here real quick. That'll kind of bump me upside down. But they're pretty good. They like I said about the size that they take up in your toolbox. They take up a decent amount of space, and if you can put your sockets in a vertical position stored, I would recommend that, because the size, the area, the real estate that they take up is significantly less. Probably at least 30% or so, if they're especially a deep socket, they're going to take up only 30% of that size. Like for example, this is obviously one of the bigger ones, but if you put it there, it's about 3 times the size of that. And if you have a drawer that's this big, all of a sudden it only needs to be this big for that same amount of storage. They're made out of a plastic. They do feel a little brittle. I haven't dropped them. I've had them under vehicles at different times. If I'm doing a real involved thing, I can't even think of a good example right now, but there have been a few times where I would go in, and if I'm gonna need to take more than like 4 sockets or 3 sockets under a vehicle, I'm just gonna take the whole rail. One, I don't have a whole bunch of sockets rolling around loosely under the vehicle, which that kind of sucks. Where's the 10mm? Don't know. Actually, I'm pretty good about that. I really don't think I lose all too many tools. Maybe it's like a 1 percentile or something, compared to maybe your average 5 to 7% loss, or whatever, loss prevention or whatever. So I think I do pretty good with that. But like I said, these are on the brittle side. If you were going to do something outside in the winter time, if you're real careful, you probably won't have an issue. But plastic, when it's really cold, is going to get really brittle. And hey, there's a spider. And you could have an issue with that. Aside from that, if you're careful, I really don't see it being too big of a deal. Like I said, they do have pretty good retention. You see there, you can kind of bang the you can bang the magnet, and none of the shallows will come off. But if you bang the deeps, they kind of bounce around, and they're definitely going to come off if you were to do that, like I did straight vertical with those. Something else I wish that they did different, because as you see here, there's a few different sets. For example, they make these trays for 1/2 inch drive, 3/8, and 1/4 inch. Unfortunately, they have a select number that they use for each of those sides. It's not like for 1/2 inch drive they hold a dozen, and for 3/8 they hold a dozen, and for 1/4 inch they hold a dozen. I'm not necessarily saying that my sockets range with that number count in each of those categories, 1/2 inch, 3/8, and 1/4 inch, but there's no set amount. Like for these, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. That holds 14, and that's the 3/8 holds 14. This is the 1/4 inch. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13. 13. I don't know how many the 1/2 inch holds, but I remember it being a lot less than both my standard and metric and my chrome and impact. So I didn't even try to go that route, because then I would have to like mismatch and stuff like that, and you know, it being as bulky as it is, and if it doesn't hold all my set, then I have to put 2 of these on here, and it wouldn't even hold my set, because my metric 1/2 inch goes from like 10 millimeter to like 32 or something without skipping one, at least my shallow set anyway. So it's kind of upsetting that they don't have like 3 different versions. Like, you know, most 1/4 inch or a lot of 1/4 inch is going to be like 10 sockets. You know, do they have a 4? Do they have a 5.5 in a 1/4 inch socket metric? You know, just for example, maybe yes, maybe no. So it would be nice if they had like a 10, and then they had a 12, and then maybe like a 15 slot count for the trays in each different setting. That wouldn't necessarily work for my 1/2 inch, because again, I have a huge 1/2 inch set. But it would be nice if they had a variety, because the problem is when you're hurting for space, you know, you have extra room on these trays that you don't use. And I don't want to start putting specialty sockets or like a swivel or something. I put swivels on these just because I had a couple swivels, and if I'm using 1/4 inch, that's not hurting anything. That's not like I'm going to have this and then I'll be like, oh, the swivel's on that. I have 2, I can do that. But for other stuff, you know, you start having a dozen different adapters, chrome and impact and swivel adapters and stuff like that. You know, one's going to have to be on one tray and not the other. I could favor the metric, but of course, you know, Murphy's Law, I'm going to want the one that's on the other and have to go get that. At that point, it's pointless. For organization in the toolbox, maybe. I don't really like doing that. I'd rather have it a more organized system that doesn't have to be so back and forth with everything. But other than that, if I was going to rate these, I would give them maybe between a 7 and an 8. Yes, they have some shortcomings, but with that being said, if you can deal with the limitations, it's really not that bad at all. And one more thing before I close this video up, I paid for these myself. Okay, I got them from Summit Racing. I think I paid about $12 to $15 per. That seemed to be the cheapest price that I could get them for anywhere. Summit Racing has a good tool section if you're into automotive stuff, and really it kind of goes over into fabrication as well, so that's pretty cool. Thanks for watching. It's like I always say, let's all learn from each other.